Good evening, fight fans. It just ended UFC Fight Night 176. Now it's time for the Iman Report. It is Saturday night, May 30th, 2020. I hope everybody's having a great night. I hope everybody's stay safe. I think tonight we saw an end of an era as Tyron Woodley loses by unanimous decision to Gilbert Burns. And Woodley looked like a 40-year-old fighter tonight. He did not. He looked like a shell of his former self. He looked mentally frazzled tonight. And I think that loss to Kamaru Usman drained him. So what happens to Tyron Woodley from here? Does he retire? Does he change camps? Does he maybe go to middleweight? Or does he just maybe take a long layoff and maybe see a sports psychiatrist? A lot more questions than answers for the former champion Tyron Woodley. But Gilbert Burns, it was his night to shine. He gets the win. And certainly now he's going to be among the top four in the welterweight division. Undefeated at welterweight. He looks a lot better at 170 than he ever did at 155. And certainly he called for a title shot. Is that in the cards? I doubt it. But I do think he will get a title eliminator. That is certainly in the works. Depends. I think Usman might have a long layoff coming. I don't know. Honestly, I think he gets paired with, when it's all said and done, he likely fights Jorge Masvidal or Nate Diaz next. Yeah, Masvidal's likely next for Kamaru Usman. That would be my best guess. But I do think a title eliminator is in the future for Gilbert Burns. Two possible opponents. The first opponent is Colby Covington. That could be fun. Two elite grapplers. And Covington actually showed in his last fight against Usman, he can actually throw some strikes. That could be a potential title eliminator. You can put him up against boring-ass Colby Covington. And, of course, Covington will talk shit like he always does. Or I think the better route to go is the original opponent for Tyron Woodley in the last card, and I think a guy who's won 8 fights in a row. This should be the next fight for Gilbert Burns against one Leon Edwards, who's won 8 fights in a row, and he himself might be in the comparable position to Gilbert Burns. The winner of that fight would likely be in line for a title shot. And with the restrictions starting to ease in Great Britain, you could set it up later this summer on Fight Island. I think that could be a good headliner for a fight night card. Give me Burns versus Edwards on Fight Island. I think that would be a great fight. Great fight night main event. That's where I think is next for Gilbert Burns. And welcome to the stacked 170 division. It's becoming murderer's row, especially if Conor sticks around at 170. It's getting very fun and very stacked at 170. As for Tyron Woodley, he's got to do some soul searching. I don't know if he should take a fight right away. I think maybe he does some soul searching. But I really don't know who should be next for him at this point. I think retirement, maybe. Maybe he fights Santiago Ponzinibbio if he ever decides to fight again. But, Woodley's future is not bright. At best, he's a gatekeeper for the rest of his career, and I don't ever see him fighting for the title shot again. So that's what I think's in the cards for both of these fighters. In the co-main event, we had a good co-main event by split decision. Augusto Sakai beats Blagory Ivanov. This one was a pretty good fight. For Sakai, this fight likely gets him a top 10 opponent. And I think the right opponent for Augusto Sakai, some people think it should be Derek Lewis. Other people think it might be Walt Harris. But I think the fighter that leaps out of my mind for Augusto Sakai next should give him Alistair Overeem. There is an experienced top 10 fighter right there. If he can get past Alistair Overeem in his next fight, that could get Augusto Sakai right in the title hunt. As for Ivanov, still a seasoned gatekeeper, good fight IQ. So I think for Ivanov, his next fight should be against another fight prospect that took a step back last time, Walt Harris. This would be a good opportunity for Walt Harris to see what he's learned from fighting somebody with a higher fight IQ. What did he learn? Ivanov is another fighter that has that high fight IQ, whereas can Walt Harris grow his fight IQ? So I think that those two should fight. That would be a good matchup for Blagoy Ivanov. And in the fight before that, we had Billy Quarantillo beating Spike Carlisle by unanimous decision. As for what is next for Quarantillo, take a look at where he's ranked. So bear with me a second. But Quarantillo, undefeated. He certainly looks like he's got a future in the UFC. But the question is, how big of a ceiling does he have in the UFC? His next fight should be against Joel Alvarez. I think that's probably the next logical step up. That's what's probably the next fighter ranked above him, so I'll go with that. As for Spike Carlisle, his next fight should be against... This is one thing I don't like about these fight night cards sometimes, is that you get a lot of fighters sometimes that are like very low in the ranking, so sometimes it's a little more difficult to pair these fighters up. So I'm going to do a little, maybe a skosh of some lazy matchmaking on that one. I'll give him Brock Weaver. And in the fight before that, hold on. Yeah. Well, pardon the interruption there. Somebody ringing my doorbell. But for Roosevelt Roberts, he submits Brock Weaver by submission in the second round. As for who's next for Roosevelt Roberts, next fight for Roosevelt Roberts should be Omar Antonio Morales Ferrer. I think that would. So there we go. Undefeated fighters. So that put two prospects that are in the top 50. That will probably do there. And then in the first fight on the main card tonight, Mackenzie Dern submits Hannah Cyphers in a night where Mackenzie Dern gets right back on track. In her previous fight before that, she was embarrassed by Amanda Rebus. She gets back on track against Hannah Cyphers. So can Mackenzie Dern be that prospect? Can Dern be that prospect that Dana White wants her to be? Is she an actual contender? But for Dern, after that step down, I think, come on now, don't do this to me. I think a step up is in order. Maybe a fight against Amanda Lemos is next for Hannah Cyphers. And then Cyphers, that's two in a row for her, I think, or yeah, that's two fights, two losses in a row, and she's near the bottom of the pack at the women's 125 division. So probably for her, it might be a debutante coming. So maybe a loser gets cut fight between Ariane Carnelosi and Amanda Rebus and Hannah Cyphers, excuse me, is what's next. In the main event of the prelim card, Caitlin Chikagian had no problem dispatching Antonina Shevchenko, which likely sets up Caitlin Chikagian, unfortunately, to be the next victim of Valentina Bullet Shevchenko, probably sometime later this summer or early in the fall. So that's the good news is she beat one Shevchenko, but unfortunately, the other sister is just unfortunately the other sister is a beast. So But maybe it gives her confidence, but I don't think that Chikagian's gonna. She might have a puncher's chance of beating Valentina Shevchenko, but I think it's not. So I think it's certainly going to be Chikagian versus Valentina Shevchenko next. As unfortunately, Valentina Shevchenko has cleaned out everybody else in the women's 125 division. As for Antonina Shevchenko, her next fight should be against. Make sure she fought already. Maybe Macy Barber. That would not be a bad matchup there. Or the loser of Jillian Robertson and Courtney Casey are two ideas next for Antonina Shevchenko. I think I'll go with the loser of Robertson and Casey. I would say an appropriate step down after taking on a beast in Caitlin Chikagian. Daniel Rodriguez beats Gabriel Green by unanimous decision. What's next for Rodriguez? Rodriguez is another fighter that's looking like he is going to have a bright future in the UFC. I think the next fight for Daniel Rodriguez should be a fun fight against him and Aussie Jake Matthews, possibly on Fight Island. I think that's what should be next. As for Gabriel Green, I think just slap him up against a debutante. That's what I think should be next. And in the fight before that, prospect Jamal Hill TKOs Klidson Abreu with a knee to the body. And for Jamal Hill, he's looking like he could be the future at 205. And I think he's earned himself possibly a fighter that's right, maybe on the edge of the top 15. And I think the right fighter for him coming up might be another prospect who's lost a couple fights. And I think that it would be a step down for him and a step up for Hill. Johnny Walker versus Jamal Hill. I think that would be an excellent fight. Could certainly be maybe put it on a, what shall I say, the prelim card of a pay-per-view event. Could be a good showcase for Jamal Hill. Also could be a good opportunity for Johnny Walker to get back on track. So I think I normally don't like doing winner versus loser, but this might be an exception to the rule right here. So book it. I think this one is one I'd like to see, Jamal Hill and Johnny Walker. As for Klidson Abreu, what's next for Abreu? I think that's 2 in a row for him. So I think a step down is in order for Abreu. I don't know, maybe a fight between him and Ion Cutelaba or Khalil Roundtree might be an appropriate step down for Clidson Abreu. Yeah, I think that's where I'd go. Either Roundtree or Cutelaba is the appropriate step down for Clidson Abreu. Then the fight before that, Brandon Royval, successful in his flyweight debut against Tim Elliott. So Royval might have a bright future in a much needed talent pool at 125. I'll put him up against the winner between Mark De La Rosa and Jordan Espinoza. That's what I think should be next for Royval. As for Tim Elliott, I think it's time for him to retire. For Tim Elliott, that is, I think his fights as he lost in a row. That's his third fight in a row. He's 1-4 in his last 5 fights. If you stretch it even further than that, I would say 2-5 in his last 7. So that's been 2-5 since his return to the UFC. So I don't think there's any need to. I don't think there's any need to have Tim Elliott staying in the UFC anymore. I think cut him. I think for Tim Elliott, I think maybe it's time for him to go back on the regional circuit. I don't think he's ever going to be a contender in the UFC, and I think it was just a fluke, unfortunately. I think he's had 2 unsuccessful runs in the UFC. And for Elliott, I think it's just time to move on to another promotion. Casey Kenny beats Louis Smolka. So Kenny gets a much needed win after losing to Davalishvili his last time in the octagon. Who's next for Casey Kenny? Maybe the winner of Sean O'Malley and Eddie Wineland should be in the future for. I think I'll give him the winner of Wineland and O'Malley for Casey Kenny. Definitely rebounded after his first loss. As for Louis Smolka, what's next for Smolka? I think this is his first loss since returning to the UFC. Okay, he's been back in the UFC since. Okay, he's been 2-2, so he's exchanged wins and losses since returning to the UFC. Certainly a gatekeeper at 135. So for Smolka, probably going to get another young gun at some point. Maybe Ricky Steele, since I think Ricky Steele's going to be coming to the UFC. So have Louis Smolka welcome Ricky Steele to the UFC. That makes sense. Chris Gutierrez TKO's Vince Morales in the first fight of the night for Chris Gutierrez. His next fight should be against Justin Gonzalez. That'll probably be next. So probably Gonzalez is going to make his debut from the Dana White Contender Series. Is likely next for him. And as for Vince Morales, let's probably give him a debutante. That's what I think's next for Morales. So overall, not a bad night. Pretty good fight card. I'd rank it on a scale of 1 to 10. Give it an 8. I'll give tonight's fight card an 8. Things I like seeing at the Apex tonight. I like that the interviews were done via social distancing. I think that was a good change on that. So I do like that they're not doing the octagon interviews. That's a lot safer. I wish they would still mask the referees. I would prefer they wear a mask in the octagons. I know I'm more on the side of wearing masks. I know some of you do not like to wear masks out in public. But to each their own on that, and that's just my opinion is we all have to learn to wear masks, and I'd like to see the referees wear masks inside the octagon. But overall, though, it was pretty good in the Apex. It was a nice setup. I don't know if they can hold some of the bigger fights with the smaller octagon at the Apex venue, so we'll see how long that lasts. Fight Island is in the works, of course. So hopefully we'll see Fight Island up by June or July, hopefully. But, we've got, and my favorite thing about June, we're going to have fight after fight after fight every Saturday night. So that's going to feel really good, especially on those hot summer days. It'll be 101 outside, 100 degrees outside in my neck of the woods normally this time of year. So it's always good to watch a UFC fight on a hot summer afternoon, hot Saturday night. So UFC's back and they're back in business, baby. So, and with not a lot of the sports going on right now, if it's not a pay-per-view, I'd expect it to be on big ESPN. So, but hopefully everybody's staying safe tonight. Follow your stay-at-home orders if you're under a stay-at-home order, of course. Please don't protest. Please don't incite the violence. It was a nice distraction tonight watching the fights. It was a nice distraction from seeing all that violence and rioting out there in the rest of the country. That I just hope that it's sad about that. That was just really sad what happened to George Floyd. I hope that the other officers get charged soon. There's no excuse for it. It is never justified to put somebody's knee on somebody's neck. That is never justified. Hopefully, this will get our local police departments better trained on interacting with people and suspects. And unfortunately, it's just created a situation, what's been going on the last decade, where people can't trust the police, and that's not a good thing. Hopefully, it will send a message to our governors that maybe it's time to start teaching our officers better people skills. But I feel bad for the police departments too in the same breath, because it's not an easy job. It doesn't give these looters a right to incite violence, though, either. Words do better to get to make change. Violence doesn't. And I hope these people that are out rioting tonight think of what their actions are going to do. You might see soldiers having to be deployed to places like Minneapolis, which is a very scary thought. So it was nice to have UFC tonight to really just distract us from a few hours from this scary world we're in, and hopefully we see order restored very soon. But violence doesn't solve it. Peaceful protest. Use your words. Write to your congressman. Go out and vote. That's how you make change. Violence only makes it worse. And now you might be seeing a situation where you're having to see our military being deployed to places where they shouldn't be having to be deployed to restore order. That's just not right. And hopefully we can fix this racism thing. I wish things were better. But this is maybe a wake-up call that we need to teach our children that all lives matter. When you go to heaven, we're all going to have to coexist in heaven. Whether we're black, white, Hispanic, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, we all have to live in this world together. And no race is superior to others. It's all lives matter. And this violence has to stop. Hopefully I just hope we can see the day where racism is not an issue. And I keep waiting for that day. It really broke my heart. And think of your actions tonight. Everybody have a good night. Try to get some sleep. Pray. Tomorrow, please pray for the family of George Floyd. Pray for our local police. Just a prayer to end racism. That is what you need to do. Pray, talk, don't use violence. Save the violence for the octagon. Everybody have a good night.